Deload weeks. What's the deal with them? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a study that was recently released on the topic of deloads. So the main point of this video is for me to take this study and summarize it for you, and then more importantly, provide you with my interpretations of that study so we can take that information and apply it in a practical setting. So let's just get right to it. The name of the study is Gaining More from Doing Less, the effects of a 1-week deload period during supervised resistance training on muscular adaptations. So what is a deload? A deload is basically a 1-week period, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, where you significantly reduce your volume and or intensity. In athletics, deloads are used as a potentiation tool leading into the next training phase or a competition. But in terms of muscle growth, what's the deal with deloads? Are they actually useful? Keep in mind, in this study, they not only looked at muscle growth, but they also looked at strength, power, and endurance. However, in this video, I'm only going to be focusing on the muscle growth aspect of it. So we only care about muscle hypertrophy right now, at least in this video. Now, research on deloads used for muscle growth is very limited. So keep in mind, even though this study is very interesting, it's only one study. So in the ideal world, in the future, we'll have multiple studies on this topic done in some ever so slightly different ways so that we can hopefully come to a more clear-cut conclusion. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's talk about the details of the study. So, starting off, they recruited 50 people, but 39 people completed it. So they had a sample size of 39, which in exercise science is pretty standard. You're not going to get hundreds or thousands of people to participate in these studies. So typically in an exercise science-based study, it's not abnormal to see 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 if they're lucky, people participating. So 39 people completed this study. Pretty solid for an exercise science study. It was a combination of males and females from a university setting. The criteria was that they had to be ages 18 to 40 in good health, no major health issues. They were all defined as trained. Now, here's their definition of a trained individual. This means that they've been training for at least 3 times a week for at least 1 year. So, on average, they're not necessarily advanced, but maybe not necessarily beginners, maybe a little bit more than that. On average, these people are pretty decently trained. They were separated into 2 groups, the experimental group, which is also the deload group, and the traditional group, which is the traditional training group that trained without deloads. So they had these subjects train for a 9-week period. For the experimental or deload group, they had them take a 1-week detraining period in the middle of that 9-week period. For the traditional training group, they trained all throughout the 9-week period. No detraining period. They had everybody train 4 times per week following an upper-lower split. So upper, lower, upper, lower. All sets were encouraged to failure. Now, they defined failure as the inability to complete a rep, which is good because we know that they at least standardized it. So we know that for them, failure is when you cannot complete a concentric rep anymore. They had them train in the 8 to 12 rep range, and loads were adjusted in order to maintain that target rep range. Now, here's the deal. Only the lower body routines were supervised. For the upper body workouts, they had the subjects just do that on their own. However, they had to keep a training log that they would submit for accountability. Ideally, they would be supervised for all 4 sessions, but I do understand when you're getting people to participate in these studies, you have to give them an incentive. And usually that incentive is in the form of money, right? So I'm not exactly sure how much money they got to conduct this study, but maybe they didn't have enough to pay the subjects for 4 sessions per week. So, that's a limitation, but okay, it is what it is. Of course, they took pre and post study measurements via BIA, which is bioelectrical impedance analysis, and muscle thickness via ultrasound. And the statistician and the ultrasound tech were blinded. Now, what they hypothesized in this study was that the deload group, the experimental group who took a 1 week detraining period in the middle of that 9 week training period, would experience better gains. The reason why they believe this is because of a potential resensitization effect. Now, what is resensitization? The idea behind it is that you train pretty hard for a period of time. Over time, you become less sensitive to gains. So you would take a short period of reduced training, come back, and you would be sensitive to gains again. Therefore, maybe even making you more sensitive to them. So that's why they hypothesized that the deload group would actually experience a bit more gains by the end of the 9 week period. But what were the findings? Well, they found at the end of the study that gains were actually similar between the training groups, meaning that the detraining period did not resensitize the participants to a hypertrophy stimulus. Interesting. So, what are my thoughts on this study? Overall, I think it's a fine study with some limitations, but every study is going to have them. It just is what it is. No study is going to be 100% perfect. This is why we need multiple studies on a topic to help us come to better conclusions or more valid conclusions. Now, I wouldn't take this study at face value and just say that deloads are totally worthless. If anything, I think that this study just shows that at times, if you need to take a week off here and there due to whatever reason, maybe it's a personal reason, it probably wouldn't hinder your growth. Personally, I would like to see a study done measuring hypertrophy outcomes in a more long-term setting. However, I do understand that in exercise science research, that's much easier said than done. Part of me wonders if the group that took a week off would possibly have gotten a small resensitization effect if they didn't detrain so early after just 4 weeks. What would it look like if they trained for maybe 7 or 8 weeks, then detrained, and then came back? Would they actually experience that resensitization effect? Not sure. Another thing, I also wonder what the results of the study would be if they did a true deload period. In the study, they didn't actually do a deload in the way that it's done in a practical setting. They completely detrained a group for 1 week, meaning that they did not train at all. They just took the week off. So I do wonder what the results would be at the end of the study if they maybe kept the trainees training during that deload week, maybe just 2 days a week, or maybe they kept them at 4 days a week and just reduced some volume and or intensity. I wonder what that would look like. There was also some reporting of lethargy and even more muscle soreness upon returning for the deload group or the detraining group. And for anybody who's actually been training for a while, you've probably experienced this. You take a full week off and you come back, and that first week or maybe the first few sessions are a bit suckier because you're almost not used to training since you just took a full week off. So again, I wonder if rather than just taking the full week off, they just had the detraining group or the deload group, still train just at a lower intensity and or volume. What are my takeaways from this study? I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I think that one key takeaway could be that if you ever did really need to take a full week off, it probably wouldn't hinder your growth, as long as you're not doing it all the time, of course. You can't just take a week off every single week, but if you're somebody that trains regularly and you have something pop up, or you just really need to take some time to yourself, taking a 1 week period probably won't send you in the wrong direction. Also, if you're deloading for a possible resensitization, again, we don't know if that's 100% true yet, but if you're deloading for that potential purpose, we can probably say now, after the results of this study, that 4 weeks of hard training may be a bit too early for that. You probably want to go a little bit longer. If you're going to deload after training hard for 4 weeks, it should probably be for another reason, maybe for auto-regulation purposes, or again, if something personal pops up and you just need to take the week off. And one final takeaway that I have for this study, we can probably say now, based off of the information provided here, that the most extreme version of a deload doesn't provide us with resensitization effects. Remember what a deload is. A deload is basically just a period of training where you reduce your volume and or intensity. In the study, they took the most extreme version. They literally reduced your volume and intensity down to 0. So we can probably say with some confidence that that doesn't seem to work for what we're looking for, at least. Okay, so that's all I have for this video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them and let me know if there's another study you would like me to review. See you later.